Thank you. My sister Debbie Parsons is here. We used to run a sustainable 10 acres out at Pullenvale. We grew up working in our family factory, Gow and Co., which made jelly crystals, washing powder, cake mixes, and our lucky 10 cattle were fed sustainably on recycled floor sweepings. So they'd come charging across to the car to be fed with big sacks of flour and jelly crystals and cake mixes, and they run around with bits of string hanging out of their mouth. I hope we don't get raided now. All right, so this is the first of a series of 4 lectures.
Are you able to sit so that a number of us can actually see the...
This is the first in a series of 4 lectures. This is the achievements of the first 2 years of the Trump White House in restoring capitalism. The second lecture will be factions in the Washington, D.C. swamp. The third will be tactics used by the Trump White House to drain the Washington, D.C. swamp. And the fourth will be ramifications of all of this for Australian political scene and economy. First of all, Trump's background. His family were Lutheran in Germany, Protestant Presbyterians now. He went to military school, boarding at high school, New York Military Academy. So he has an affiliation with the military, has a very strong affiliation with the Evangelistic Church in the United States and very Christian principles. He obviously a very successful business person. He dealt with the building mafia in New York, the Wall Street mafia in New York, and the politicians across America. And he was also, of course, in the entertainment business with his highly successful TV show. So he rubbed shoulders with the Hollywood and New York entertainment and news elite. So why do they all hate him? It's a very good question, isn't it? Because he's betrayed them. And they don't treat betrayals lightly in this criminal cabal that rules the world at the moment. So how does the global corporate cabal operate? And I'll use the term criminal cabal, banksters, and criminal cabal interchangeably. All of those industry sectors I mentioned work together as a team, as a pack, including the lobbyist groups that raid farms, the union movement. They're all in the same criminal cabal. That's why they work so seamlessly together. That's why it's so frustrating for us watching. So how it works is, going back to Cecil Rhodes' day, a group of Fabians in London sat down, Rothschilds, Cecil Rhodes, and a few other well-knowns, the Royal Society members, and they said, we've got a good thing going here. We can rule the world if we do this properly. The British Empire was already controlling a lot of the world, and all they've done is strengthen that position. So out of the City of London, the banksters funded the East Indies Company and the Dutch East India Company on trade into India, China, and then eventually the West Indies. So that was the trading routes were starting up, monopolies. What they discovered was they could also trade drugs, and you've heard of the opium wars in China. Because they had ships going across the world, they could also trade children and slaves and arms. They could start civil wars and use the British Army to intervene to enforce their trade monopolies. That's still going. The British Empire may have finished, but those monopolies in politics, trade, drugs, child smuggling, arms smuggling are continuing and flourishing. That's the world that we live in today. There's only a very few families, out of the City of London mostly, that run all of this criminal cabal enterprise, and hats off to them, they do it extremely well. Because they control the media companies, moved by Rockefeller in the 1920s, they realised they had a bit of bad publicity back then when they took over the Reserve Bank, the US Federal Reserve. So they started taking over the newspapers and the print media, and then eventually the TV media, and eventually Hollywood. So that's the propaganda campaign that we're faced with every day. The US stood up to them and had a civil war and kicked out the banksters and kicked out the British Empire companies. So, and they've never been forgiven for that. So, so the deep state's plan, this cabal, was to destroy the American economy through high tax, red tape, and cheap imports. And we've been hearing a bit about that tonight. So basically make it impossible if you're a manufacturer to do business, even a farmer, in the United States. Thus, let's relocate to China. Let's relocate to Mexico under the NAFTA agreement, under the Trans-Pacific Partnership, under the World Trade Organization, free trade. And it's not free trade because Asia has slave labour, so very cheap labour, and it's not fair trade at all. So the plan was for China to become the industrial centre. China sort of breached that agreement, and they've become a military power as well. The United States was meant to be reduced to a third world country. So again, that's the model that we live in. The United States is a war economy, has been for the last 200 years, had constant wars for 200 years. Some of this is applicable to Australia as well. And a war economy means the defence companies do well. The governments have to borrow money for the wars so that the banksters do well, but not many other people do. So there's only a very small percentage that actually benefit from this war economy. And the wars, when you look at them, they shouldn't be wars. Next.
In the Bush family, one of the biggest changes.
Yeah, it's crony capitalism. And crony capitalism is another word, fancy word for fascism, where corporates dictate to the governments the laws and regulations to protect their own monopolies. And Germany during the Nazi war, the Nazis in Germany, the corporates really ran Germany very successfully. And after the war, they've continued. The big pharmaceutical companies around the world are a result of that system. It works very well. So, Trump's top 10 major achievements, these are my favourites. Political correctness. The first thing he did, even before the election, was destroy political correctness. He also destroyed the media. Those pesky reporters that ask the stupid questions. He just demolished them. So fake news, we all know what fake news is now. We didn't before. Satanic Hollywood is severely under attack at the moment. And we're hearing more and more sex scandals come out of Hollywood, which is really their satanic cult that they live in. The actresses and actors don't particularly like it, but they're stuck with it. But Trump's destroying it through truth and exposure. Same with the NFL. They've dared stand up to him and he's destroying them as well. People are cutting the cable, not watching football anymore. Christian values. Every speech he espouses Christian values, and Christian values is more about going to church. It's about strong communities, strong families, and just leading decent lives. None of us want to go to war. We love our neighbours, we love each other, and we want to be nice to each other. It's the only people who are bad, evil, corrupt people are the people that get into positions of power. And all of these people happen to be related, strangely enough. And it's a very small percentage of our society, but they're all related and they all make sure they get the good jobs. We don't. World peace is breaking out, despite what the fake news has been telling us. Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10, ABC, SBS, they tell us that Trump's a warmonger, there's going to be nuclear war. Peace is breaking out in the Middle East. Peace has broken out in North Korea. The warmongers are stirring up trouble in Venezuela now, but that's interesting to watch Trump's tactics there. There's drugs and child trafficking arrests. He's cutting off their finances through stopping the drug trade. The CIA has been running 90% of the drug trade around the world, 90% of the child trafficking. And it's really the criminal cartel going back to the India days. That's what the wall's about. It's about stopping the kids coming up through the desert in Mexico, stopping the drugs coming up and stopping the arms going down to the Mexican drug cartels. And who's organising it? The US government, CIA, the black hats. So that's what the wall's about. The wall's been built. So how do you get the US economy kick-started? Consumer spending is 70% of the US economy. So what he's done is 5+ trillion in tax cuts. 60% of those went to the families. So that's to get consumers spending again, to get them confident. Also big corporate tax cuts, which is on the next slide. But that money's trickled down to pay rises and bonuses, you may have heard last year in the news. That's all about consumer confidence, business confidence, and it's worked. The military have got the largest pay rise in 10 years. Trying to fix up Obamacare. He's attacking the pharmaceutical companies now, and they're pushing the drug prices down. And 226,000 illegal aliens have been removed in the last 2 years from America. You don't see that.
We got some on the route.
Yeah, yes. Trump agreed to take those, but I don't think he's going to. So that's resulted in 4 million new jobs in 2 years, jobless at 50-year lows, household income of 61,000, which is the highest in 10 years, wages rising the most in 10 years, consumer confidence, the all-important indicator, 10-year high, retail sales up, and 5 million Americans lifted off food stamps. You don't hear that very much. Next. So it's all good news. On the Trump website, there's a list of 187 achievements that his promises kept. These are only a few. Business investment, similar to the consumers, but tax cuts, cutting the red tape, big thing. For every regulation introduced, 22 have been cut. An amazing stat. So things like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Coal Act, which was inhibiting coal mines, opening up gas and oil leases, approving oil pipelines from Alaska. I think it was the Dakota pipeline that was held up. It just gets the economy moving and business confidence going, companies coming back. First thing Trump did was get on the phone to General Electric, Ford, other big companies and say, you're coming back to America, and they did. So that's created all of those jobs in the right-hand column, 400,000 jobs in manufacturing, 100,000 oil and gas jobs. For the first time in 10 years, the US is a net gas exporter. Amazing, isn't it? Thank you. So maintaining government spending. So people have been saying overspending, $21 trillion debt and close to $1 trillion deficit on the budget each year. But he has to keep the government spending going to keep the economy going. It's about confidence. 18% of the economy is government spending, so he's got to keep it going. In Australia, it's more than that, unfortunately. He is reducing staff, 16,000 less staff, out of over 2 million though. It's a big numbers in America. And he has a restructure plan to reduce staff further through natural attrition, which is probably what Campbell Newman should have done instead of sacking people. Trade. So priority, absolute priority. They're losing 5% off GDP through trade, so minus 5% is trade's net contribution. Exports minus imports, minus 5%. Most of that's from China. So there's like $600 billion in imports from China and half of that in exports. So it's a huge whack. That's why he's in China renegotiating the trade export. Withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, renegotiated NAFTA, withdrew from the Paris Agreement. All of these were anti-jobs. All of these were about transferring manufacturing to China and Mexico, low-cost labour countries, which don't have these environmental regulations. So it's all hands to the deck on the economy. When the share market started plummeting in December, Trump got on the phone and the fund managers started buying shares. They called it rebalancing their portfolios. So started buying more shares, and the federal bank started the printing press, started printing the free money again, which, surprise, surprise, was used to buy shares and keep the market propped up. And that's to do with business confidence, consumer confidence. He wants to keep the economy going until the next election in 2020, which is 2 years away. And after that, there'll almost certainly be a restructure, because the fiat currency, which is monopoly money that we use in Australia, use in the United States, is not backed by gold anymore. Went off the gold standard in the 70s. So the currency is meant to be backed by the economy. But as we know, Chris, the banks can print as much money as they want. They can lend as much money as they want. As
They're
long as,
very good at screwing as well, Stewart.
yeah, as long as people fill out the forms properly. If they don't, it's the broker's fault. So you can see it's a very delicate game. The petrodollar, which is the US dollar, is coming to an end of its life cycle. The 40 years are up, so over 50 years now. It's coming to its end, so Trump has to keep the economy going until they have a new system in place. Thank you very much.